Good evening. This is Political Forum for Wednesday, July 13th. Today we welcome Alderman Brian Hopkins of the 2nd Ward as our guest. Thank you for appearing on the show tonight, Alderman.
Thank you, Eileen. I'm happy to be here.
My name is Eileen Kim, and I'm a board member here at CAN TV. You're watching a live interactive program brought to you as a community service of CAN TV. Be sure to tell your friends that they can also watch this show online at cantv.org/hotline. We welcome your questions and comments for Alderman Hopkins by calling us at 312-738-1060.
And the new phones will ring at this beautiful new studio.
Yes. During the next 25 minutes, we'll try to get to as many of your calls as possible on the air. So Alderman, can you start by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. Well, I'm privileged to represent what I think is one of the most interesting and unique wards in the city of Chicago. I've been in office now for a little over a year. Prior to that, I was the chief of staff for one of our Cook County commissioners, Commissioner John Daly, and I had that position for many years. So I'm no stranger to local government, no stranger to the building that contains both the City Council and the Cook County Board. But it was a big jump to go from a staff position to elected position. It's a great increase in responsibility and one I take very seriously. But I do feel that my background in local government really did prepare me for this job, and it's helped me to get the first year under my belt, and I think we're off to a fairly good start serving the communities of the 2nd Ward.
Great, and thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
So your ward boundaries are very interesting. Can you tell us some of the neighborhoods your ward covers and what it's like to represent such a diverse
Yes,
ward?
they are, and I can tell you, as I said, just a little over a year in office, but the memory of what it was like to be a candidate is still very fresh in my mind. And as you can imagine, looking at the geography there, to run as a candidate in an area like that is very challenging. We had, I think, over 14 debates during the course of the campaign because every community organization in the new boundaries of the 2nd Ward wanted to be part of the action, wanted to host us. And that was really a precursor to what it was going to be like to govern a ward like that. I really don't have a single neighborhood in my ward that's intact. What I have is fragments and pieces of many, many neighborhoods. In some cases, I have very small fragments. So what that does is two things. It increases the workload because you have to engage in so many different stakeholders, so many different community organizations. I can't say to a neighborhood, you know, I only have 2 blocks of you, so I'm just not going to take your calls and emails. I simply can't say that. I've got to respond to everybody. So it creates a tremendous demand for myself and my staff, who do an outstanding job. But the advantage to it is I really have a citywide perspective. Because I am not the voice of a single neighborhood. I go from the lake on the east, I go all the way west to Bucktown and Wicker Park and Ukrainian Village. I'm even west of Damon in some areas. So that gives me a perspective that's a little more citywide in scope than an alderman that represents a smaller area of geography. And it means that I have to be open to a very diverse set of opinions, ideas, needs, and constituencies. And I actually think, as an alderman, I'm very lucky to have that. I wouldn't trade my ward for any of the other 49 wards in the city, despite the unusual shape to the geography.
And speaking of engaging with communities, what's the best way for constituents to get a hold of you? We're going to put your contact information.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very accessible. Email. I respond to tweets. I respond to Facebook posts. We respond to phone calls. I'm out in the community every day. I go to quite a few evening events and weekend events as well. My neighborhood is very fond of neighborhood festivals. So I spend a lot of time on Saturdays and Sundays going to neighborhood festivals. So we're very accessible, and we get quite a few service requests on a daily basis. You can go to the website and you can submit a service request that way, or call us or email us at ward02@cityofchicago.org. We're here to serve you.
Great. And for our viewers who didn't catch the contact information, don't worry, we'll put it we'll put it up again throughout the show. So I recently read about your efforts to increase the safety programs budget for the special service area that covers the Wicker Park and Bucktown business districts. Can you give us an idea of how that's going and how the idea came about?
Sure, I'd be glad to. One of the primary issues that I hear through those calls and emails that I just referred to in addition to service requests, people are very concerned about neighborhood safety, and people are concerned about what they see as an increase in crime. The statistics may say one thing, but people's experience says something else. And if you don't feel safe in your own neighborhood, really not much else is going to matter to you. So it's very important that we do everything we possibly can to make our neighborhoods as safe as we can. Now, as an alderman, I have a limited amount of control over the Chicago Police Department. People think that aldermen can act as a commander and command the troops of the Chicago Police Department, and it really does not work that way. But yet people call us all the time and they say, "What are you doing to make our neighborhood safer?" They want to know that we have other ideas. So I really had to think outside of the box on this one. And I came up with an idea that's actually worked in some other communities, and I think it will work in the communities of the Second Ward. It involves taking money from a special taxing entity, which is called a Special Service Area, or SSA for short. And an SSA is a limited area that the businesses and the residences within that area pay a small stipend over and above their normal property tax bill. It could be anywhere from $50 to a few $1,000s depending, and that money goes into a special fund, and the budget for that fund, how they spend it, is determined by a group of commissioners that are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the alderman. And there's three broad categories that SSAs in the city can spend money on. The first is aesthetics and beautification. So they can plant trees, they can do landscaping, they can put in decorative benches on the street, they can pay for extra cleaning services. In the wintertime, they can pay for extra snow shoveling, and just make the area a little bit nicer to go over and above what the city normally would provide. The second area is marketing and promotion. So when you see those banners on the light posts that are promoting the neighborhood or promoting the neighborhood events or talking about why you should move or shop or locate your business to a certain neighborhood, oftentimes that is paid for by SSA funds to promote and market the neighborhood. The third category is public safety. And it's in this area that I think we should make a higher priority. It's not that we don't also need to clean the area and pick up the trash, but this particular SSA that happens to be in my ward as well as two other wards really wasn't spending any money at all on safety and security, and they were spending nearly all of it on those other two categories. And I just thought, with everything going on today in the city, and with the increase in some of the street crime that we have seen in the neighborhood, this is a creative way that we can actually assist the Chicago police. It's not a substitute for getting more police officers, and I've made that request, as have my neighboring aldermen. We all fight for as many police officers as we can. It's very important to try and increase the patrol force. But this was one way that we could supplement the patrol force using money that's already there. So it seemed like a really good idea to me, and I proposed it today. And we'll see what the community has to say about it. We're going to have some public meetings and allow people to comment and see if this is an idea that will be embraced.
Got it. And I believe we have a caller on the line.
Okay.
Caller, what's your question for Alderman Hopkins?
Hi, Alderman. This is a different topic, one that got a lot of press for a while there, and I know you were pretty vocal about it, but I understand the council did pass an ordinance regarding Airbnb, and I wondered how people can get a hold of that so we know what exactly the rules are at this point.
That's an excellent question. You're right. There was a tremendous amount of media attention on that issue, and once the compromise was reached, and by the way, I think it was a good compromise. It was certainly a debate, and there were times when the debate got very contentious. There were some very passionate arguments that were made pro and con, and we wound up with a compromise that I think is a reasonable compromise. Nobody in this debate was particularly happy at the end because everyone had to give something up, and no one got 100% of what they wanted. Not the industry, not the council members themselves, or the various constituencies that that came down to testify for many hours of hearings. So if the measure of a compromise is that everybody kind of walks away going, well, all right, I guess that's the best we could all do, this was a good compromise. But the media attention has since died down. And that's unfortunate because the issue is not resolved yet. It's not over. We passed a fairly complex ordinance. So the implementation of that ordinance, the enforcement of that ordinance, and the rules that the staff at City Hall will use to go forward and interpret that ordinance, we're still working through all that. And it's very important now that we get this right, because an ordinance is just a piece of paper. It doesn't enforce itself. We need additional staff, and we think we have a means to do that. There was some funding mechanisms that were provided for within the ordinance itself. There's a website that has been determined that will have to have some kind of hosting mechanism to put this online so people can see the buildings that have chosen to opt out of Airbnb and to not participate in the shared home program. So all those things need to be determined, and we're working very hard to get this up and running, because the ordinance has passed. It's now the law of the land. So it's a question of how do we implement it, how do we enforce it, and how do we communicate that to the people that have been following this debate all along. One thing that I'm working on right now that will assist the condominium buildings in particular, we're coming up with some standard language that condominiums can use to change their rules. If they choose to not allow Airbnb and the others to be in their building, we're telling the condo board members, go ahead and adopt this particular language that we're going to provide you with. It will pass legal muster in case you're challenged, and then you can take matters into your own hands locally in your building, and that'll help the condo buildings. For some of the other residential neighborhoods that are going to be dealing with this, in my ward in particular, I'm just going through it block by block. And we're working with the local community groups and the block clubs, trying to identify blocks that have problems with Airbnbs or other vacation rentals that are causing trouble, and just work with them individually to get this enforcement launched. Because, it was hard to pass the ordinance, but we did it, so now we want to make sure it works.
Got it. And we have another caller on the line. Caller, what's your question for Alderman Hopkins?
Yes, good evening. I'm an avid biker, and so I'm loving to see all of the bike lanes that are popping up throughout the city of Chicago. I'm just checking to see what's the latest on I believe there's talk of getting a bike lane on Wood Street, because obviously there's a lot of traffic, in the area. So anything to be able to make bikers, a little more safe is better. So is there any update on that?
Yeah, my understanding on that is it's moving forward. It does include part of the second ward, but there's a couple other wards involved in that as well, so I don't have exclusive jurisdiction over that. But I do support it. I think it's a good idea. Wood Street is a relatively safe street to ride your bike compared to some of the other streets in Bucktown, Wicker Park, and Ukrainian Village. And it's being used right now, primarily for people to commute, to go to the store, go shopping, and also to access the Bloomingdale Trail. And I think we've seen an increase in bike traffic on the surrounding streets since the 606 trail has come online. So we have to address that. People are riding their bikes to the trail, which makes perfect sense when you think about it. So we have to accommodate various routes that people are using to get there. And Wood Street emerged early on as one of the favored routes that cyclists were using. So to implement some additional safety measures there, and just to send the signal to cyclists and motorists alike that they belong there, that provides a measure of reassurance, and hopefully it encourages courtesy among all users, because that's really what the issue is for safety. We all have to respect each other when we're traveling out on the public roadways, whether you're a pedestrian, a cyclist, or a motorist. You have to be courteous of your fellow citizens who are out there.
And as a quick reminder for our viewers, you're watching Political Forum, a community service of CAN TV. My name is Eileen Kim, and I'm a board member here. This is a live interactive show. If you have any questions for Alderman Brian Hopkins, please give us a call at 312-738-1060. And Alderman, I believe we have another call.
Okay.
Caller, what's your question for the Alderman?
Yes, a couple of points, and I think it's important with regard to creating public policy that we strike a balance, especially in this new age of technology. The reality is that the question of the things like Airbnb and Uber and whatnot, I mean, there are established entrenched industries that have a vested interest in ensuring that, that these new fledgling industries really don't necessarily impact them economically. I mean, there are people in the city, and I know them, I live here in the Gold Coast, people who have an extra bedroom, people who would like to do something with that spare space, and Airbnb allows them to every now and then, take in someone. It also gives people who, quite frankly, can't afford to stay in the Gold Coast area when they come into Chicago an opportunity to enjoy that community, and doing it at a much lower rate than they'd have to pay to stay at a nice hotel in the nearby area. Now, I certainly agree that it was not the intention of the people of the city of Chicago to allow someone to buy a property and to use it 90% of the time as an Airbnb property. That was not the intent of what people in the condo association wanted, or others in the community. But on the other hand, we shouldn't impact that person that wants to rent out their place once every couple of months, or a room in their place once every couple of months, to help them offset their costs. And at the same time, think about the benefits that brings to Chicago, because the money that you don't pay the Hyatt or the Hilton, that's money that those people who come to Chicago, utilize Airbnb, pay to the communities in the way of spending more at restaurants and street fairs and doing all the other things that we benefit from when they come to Chicago. When someone comes to Chicago and they pay the Hyatt a certain amount of money, that money doesn't stay in Chicago. It leaves Chicago by and large. And this money through Airbnb, most of it stays in Chicago because it goes to the residents who are leasing out their places. So again, I think that there's a way to strike a balance here. I don't think that it's an either-or proposition.
Well, the caller raises a good point. In my earlier comment about the compromise, comes into play there. There were voices calling for an outright ban on Airbnb, top to bottom, to just make it illegal. And there were voices who, certainly from the Airbnb industry, which is, by the way, well-funded, who were saying, just leave us alone, let us do anything we want. So we tried to find that balance, and we tried to find the sweet spot in the middle. And I would argue we were largely successful in doing that, because Airbnb will continue to operate in Chicago. They will have appropriate restrictions and regulations, but it does remain a choice. People can go online, and you can find listings right now today in Chicago. So we didn't ban it, but I do want to respond to the idea that this was driven by the industry, and the caller mentioned the Uber debate as well, and there are a lot of parallels there. But in the case of Uber versus the taxi medallion industry, that really is an industry-driven debate. When we as aldermen get phone calls and letters and things like that on that topic, it's really the taxi industry that's representing itself there, as they have every right to do. They feel that they're under threat, and in many ways they are. They're trying to protect themselves, but that is an industry-driven debate. On the Airbnb issue, it was not an industry-driven debate from the hotel side. It wasn't hotels that were calling me. It was people. It was Chicagoans. It was voters who called me and expected me to represent their needs. And what they were telling me was, Alderman, I cannot live next door to a rowdy hotel. I cannot live in a condo building when my unit is next to someone who's renting it out to strangers who I don't know. So the people who wanted to regulate Airbnb, and my colleagues in the city council who responded to that, we were responding to Chicagoans. We were responding to people who were telling us that it was unacceptable to have these businesses operate, in many cases illegally, and to operate in a way that had a negative impact on their neighbors. That's why we decided to regulate Airbnb. It wasn't to placate the hotel industry at all. It was to respond to citizens who saw a problem. Now, people have been staying in extra rooms as tourists for years. That's been going on long since the advent of the internet. But what changed was when Airbnb came along and turned it into an industry. It went from being something that just sort of happened quietly here and there that nobody really knew about, and overnight just exploded. And they started popping up all over the place. And that's when it really became a problem. It was one of degree and one of taking it to extreme measures that we really had to respond to, and I think we did appropriately.
And I believe we have another caller on the line.
Okay.
Caller, what's your question for Alderman Hopkins?
Alderman, I'm on disability. My property taxes have doubled. People like me, we tired of like this, the city, the county look at it as the ATM machine. We was told that people like on fixed income, our taxes wouldn't be double, and it seemed like it's a switch of bait. Is there anything that can be done?
If your taxes have doubled, we all just got our tax bills recently. If your tax bills have doubled, there's a problem there. When they flash my website and contact information, please call us and we will help you appeal your assessment, because there's clearly something wrong in your case. They shouldn't double, that's extreme, and there may be something that we can do to help you specifically in your situation. But to the general idea of property tax increases being excessive, I happen to agree with you. As a candidate, I pledged to oppose any property tax increase. At the time I made that pledge, I didn't know what we would be faced with in terms of a proposed budget. I suspected a property tax increase was going to be proposed, but when I finally did see, as an alderman, the exact amount of the property tax increase that was proposed, I knew I had to vote no. I had to honor the pledge that I made to the voters of the Second Ward, who pay among the highest property taxes anywhere in the city and have among the highest assessed valuations, which really, along with the tax rate, determines what your bill is going to be. So we in city government have a limited number of revenue resources that we could look to. And I think we've gone to the property tax one time too many. There's other revenue sources out there that I think we should consider, and there's cuts that we need to make to the budget before we hit the taxpayers with another property tax bill. Because really the property tax, out of all the revenue sources, has the least amount of direct connection to your ability to pay. And it really is an unfair burden on people. And frankly, we risk losing residents. We are hearing from people now saying they're going to move out of Chicago because they can't afford to live here, because they can't afford the property taxes. And these are the kind of people who we want to stay here. These are the kind of people we want as our neighbors. So it really is a problem, and I just don't think Chicago, Second Ward in particular, can really handle any more excessive property tax increases. And I will remain true to the pledge I made as a candidate to vote no on future property tax increases.
So Alderman, we just have a few more minutes left in the program. I know, much to the dismay of a lot of parents and students, it's approaching the end of summer.
Yes, it is.
And I know you have a back-to-school fair coming up. Can you
I
tell
do, yes.
our viewers a little bit about that?
That will be on August 6th from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. At Pulaski Park, the beautiful historic field house in Pulaski Park in the Noble Square area. So we'd like to invite everyone to come by. We are offering free immunizations. You have to get your immunizations to show up for school healthy and make sure you're ready to sit in close proximity to your fellow classmates and not make them sick. So we'll be doing that along with some other health screening that I think will be a great convenience to parents who need to have this done for their kids. And then we'll be giving away some free school supplies for kids, and just really trying to make the back-to-school event a fun thing. Instead of being sad that summer's ending, we can be happy that we're going back to school with fresh crayons and sharp pencils and a nice new backpack and all the possibilities that lay before a student when they look at their brand new school supplies that haven't been touched and are ready for another school year. So that's a very special time in a child's life, and we want to be a part of that with a back-to-school festival. So please join us at Pulaski Park on August 6th.
Great. And once again, if you need to reach Alderman Hopkins, here's his contact information. Are there any final comments you'd like to make as we close out the program, Alderman?
Well, yeah, I've just really enjoyed my first year in office. I'd like to thank everyone in the Second Ward who's come into our office or called or visited, offered their feedback, their comments. One thing I've learned is that anytime you have an idea and you put it out there, you really hear from the pros and cons, and no idea is too good that it doesn't have people who think it's bad. And I guess the reverse is probably true either. I could put out a bad idea and I'd find people calling me to tell me it's good. But that's really what the public debate is all about. So I look forward to continuing that, to continuing the dialogue that I've established in my first year with all the voters and the residents of the Second Ward. Keep those cards, letters, and emails coming, and look forward to seeing you out there in the community.
Great. Alderman, thank you for appearing on Political Forum tonight, and thank you to our viewers for calling in. Our telephone technician has been Omari. Political Forum is brought to you as a community service by CAN TV. Please join us every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. on CAN TV 21 and cantv.org/hotline. Thank you very much and good night.